Marcus Alden had a rule about Tuesdays. It was not a rule he had written down anywhere, not in the leather-bound notebook he kept on his desk, or in the project management software his executive assistant used to schedule every hour of his working life. It existed only as a quiet understanding between himself and the week. A small, deliberate act of subtraction from everything that pulled at him between 7 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon. On Tuesdays, he left the corner office on the 11th floor at 4:45, took the elevator down to the lobby, and waited for his daughter. He did not send a driver. He did not have his assistant coordinate pickup. He walked out through the same glass doors that his 14-year-old company's 430 employees used every day, wearing whatever he had worn to the office, which, on this particular Tuesday in late October, was a charcoal gray Henley, dark jeans, and a worn canvas jacket he had owned since before Alden Property Technologies had a name. He carried a backpack that Nora had given him for his last birthday, olive green, slightly too small for a grown man, decorated with a small embroidered patch of a mountain she had ironed on herself during a Sunday afternoon project that had also left a faint scorch mark on her bedroom carpet. Marcus did not especially mind that the backpack was too small. He minded very few things about Tuesdays. The building at 1200 Caldwell Avenue had not always been his. He had signed the original lease on the 6th floor 15 years ago, when Alden Property Technologies was still a 3-person operation, working out of a shared co-working space, and his pitch deck had more conviction than revenue. He had watched the company grow floor by floor, the way you watch a child grow, which is to say, you feel it more than you see it, until one day you look up and realize everything has changed. He had acquired the building outright 8 years ago, the year after Nora was born, the year after her mother had decided that his ambition and her sense of self could not comfortably occupy the same future. He had signed the acquisition papers in a conference room on the 4th floor on a Thursday afternoon, and then gone home to give his 7-month-old daughter a bath, because his mother, who helped him 3 days a week, then had a church function she could not miss. He did not think about that sequence of events often, but when he walked through the lobby on Tuesday afternoons, something in him was always quietly aware of it. The lobby of 1200 Caldwell was a particular kind of beautiful that Marcus had never entirely taken credit for, even though he had hired the design firm, approved every material selection, and asked for the light fixtures to be adjusted twice before he was satisfied. The floor was pale limestone. The walls on the eastern side were glass from floor to ceiling, and in the late afternoon, the light came through at a low angle that turned everything amber and soft. There were 2 long planters along the south wall, filled with plants that his facilities manager maintained with what Marcus privately considered excessive devotion, and a reception desk of dark walnut that the same facilities manager had once described as the most expensive piece of furniture in a building full of expensive furniture, which Marcus had accepted as accurate without any particular embarrassment. He arrived in the lobby at 4:52. The after-school enrichment program his daughter attended on Tuesdays and Thursdays ran until 5:15 in the 3rd-floor conference suite that Alden Property Technologies made available to the community learning nonprofit that had partnered with the building 2 years ago. It was one of 3 civic partnerships Marcus had personally approved that year, though his name did not appear on any of the branding materials for any of them, because he did not see the point of advertising generosity. He found his usual spot near the south planters, not at the reception desk, not in the seating area, but off to the side, where the light was quieter and he could watch the lobby without being in the middle of it. He pulled out his phone and answered 3 emails he had been saving for exactly this window of time, when the answers were clearer and no one was waiting in his office doorway. The lobby was in the particular transitional state of a building between 4:30 and 5:30, when the density of people rises and falls in waves, some leaving early, some arriving from afternoon meetings outside. There were 2 women from what Marcus knew was the actuarial consulting firm on the 8th floor, talking by the elevator bank with their coats already on. There was a maintenance worker, Marcus recognized from facilities, pushing a cart toward the service corridor with the same patient expression he always had. There was a young man in a courier uniform checking something on a tablet at the front desk, while the afternoon receptionist, a woman named Dina, who had worked the lobby for 6 years, and whom Marcus knew by name and by the ongoing story of her daughter's college applications, typed something without looking up. Marcus had not yet looked directly at the security station by the main turnstile gates. He would think about that later. He would think about how his mind had cataloged the lobby the way it always did when he stood in it, filing faces and movements and small details without any particular urgency, and how he had not thought to look at the guard station first. He was reading an email from his director of operations about the quarterly maintenance audit when Nora came through the elevator doors. She was 8, and she moved through the world with the complete physical confidence of someone who has not yet learned to be uncertain about space. She was wearing her school backpack over both shoulders and carrying a rolled-up piece of paper that was almost certainly something she had made in the enrichment program, because she almost always came down carrying something she had made. She spotted him before he moved, the way children spot their people across any distance, and her face did the thing it did when she was pleased about something that she was also going to be casual about. A small compression of the mouth, followed immediately by the smile she was pretending not to have. Ba, she said the Vietnamese word for father that she had picked up from his mother and attached to him permanently somewhere around age 3, despite the fact that Marcus's Vietnamese extended to approximately 15 words and none of them were grammatically connected. "You're early." "I'm the same time I always am," he said. "You're 2 minutes early. I timed it once." "Did you account for the elevator?" She considered this seriously. "No," she admitted. He took the rolled paper from her, and she leaned against the planter beside him with the easy, practiced comfort of someone who had stood in this exact spot many times before. He knew she had. He had found her here on Tuesday afternoons for almost 2 years since the nonprofit had started its program, and she had never once seemed to find it strange that her father came to pick her up in a building where a lot of other children's parents simply sent cars. It had not occurred to him until this moment, standing here, that she might have noticed other things too, that she might have her own catalog of this lobby, filed in whatever careful order an 8-year-old uses to understand the world she moves through. The thought arrived and then passed because Nora was asking him what was in his backpack, which had become her standard Tuesday opener because she had given him the backpack with the clear strategic intent that it would be used to carry snacks. He was telling her that there were exactly 2 granola bars and that she would have to share when a voice came from his left, closer than he expected. "Excuse me, sir." Marcus turned. The man at the turnstile gate was not one he recognized. He was young, somewhere in his mid-20s, with close-cropped hair and the particular kind of stiff-shouldered posture that Marcus had learned to associate with people who were new to authority and not yet sure what to do with it. His uniform was correct pressed and fitted the kind of presentation that spoke to effort. His name badge read Kessler in black on white. There was something in his eyes that was not quite hostility and not quite professionalism, but occupied the uncertain territory between them in a way that Marcus registered with a quiet, practiced attentiveness he applied to most things. "Yes," Marcus said. "I'm going to need to see some identification or a visitor badge," Kessler said. "This is a secure building." Marcus had heard those words, or versions of them, more times in his adult life than he had ever found a clean way to count. He had heard them in hotel lobbies, and airport lounges, and conference rooms, and parking garages, and once, memorably, in the waiting area of a law firm, where he had arrived early for a meeting with the firm's senior partner, who was his lawyer, and had been asked by the firm's receptionist whether he was here for the service entrance. He had developed over the years a response to this category of moment that was not quite patience and not quite strategy, but was something in between those two things. A stillness that held the situation without escalating it, that kept all the information in place for a time when it could be used more precisely. He looked at Kessler for a moment. "I'm here to pick up my daughter," he said. He kept his voice even. "She's in the enrichment program on 3. Nora had gone very still beside him. She was 8, but she was his daughter, and she understood the texture of certain kinds of silences, even if she did not have the vocabulary for all of them yet. "I still need identification," Kessler said, and his voice carried a quality that Marcus had also heard before. A flatness that is not professional composure, but is the sound of someone who has already made a decision and is performing the question afterward. People can't just be standing in the lobby without authorization. Marcus was aware that behind Kessler, on the other side of the turnstile, the lobby was continuing. Dina had looked up from her desk. The 2 women from the actuarial firm were no longer talking. The maintenance worker had paused with his cart. The lobby, Marcus knew, had excellent acoustic properties. He had commented on this to the design firm years ago as something to be proud of. Sound traveled with unusual clarity in it. Everyone in the lobby at this moment could hear what was being said. He reached into the front pocket of his canvas jacket. He had in that pocket his wallet, his phone, and a key card on a plain lanyard. The key card was not the standard employee key card. It was the master access card for the building, matte black with a small silver strip. The kind that opened every door in 1200 Caldwell Avenue, including the ones that the building's own security staff could not access without authorization from facilities management. He had carried it for years, not because he needed it on most days, but because his father had told him once that a man should always carry proof of what he had built, even when he was the only one who could read it. He did not take the key card out yet. He took out his wallet instead, and from it he took his driver's license, and he handed it to Kessler without comment. Kessler looked at it. He looked at it for a moment longer than was necessary for reading a name. Then he handed it back. "That tells me your name," he said. "It doesn't tell me you have business here." Nora's hand found Marcus's jacket pocket and held onto the fabric there, not tugging, just holding. "Bah," she said very quietly. "Why is he talking to you like that?" Marcus put his hand over hers briefly and did not answer the question. He looked at Kessler, and he thought about his father's voice, and he thought about what kind of answer was worth giving. Across the lobby, the elevator doors opened, and a man in a light gray suit walked out, carrying a briefcase and a to-go coffee cup, moving with the frictionless ease of someone who had come and gone through this space every day without ever being asked to account for himself. He passed through the turnstile gate with his keycard and did not break stride and did not look up. Kessler did not move. Nora's grip on Marcus's jacket tightened by exactly 1 degree. Marcus watched the man in the gray suit pass through the gate. He watched Kessler's eyes and the quality of attention Kessler did not give the man. The way his gaze slid past him, the way water slides off a surface it has not been asked to catch. It was not a dramatic thing. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, and that ordinariness was precisely the weight of it. A different kind of moment might have been easier to argue with, but you cannot easily argue with the absence of attention, with the specific shape of the things a person does not do. Marcus filed it away. He had learned early in boardrooms and in negotiations and in the particular school of experience that belongs to people who are frequently underestimated, that the most important moments are often the ones that look the least like moments. A sidelong glance, a question that takes half a second too long, a gate that opens for one person without hesitation and requires documentation from another. These were the things you had to hold in the mind with great care, not because they were unclear, but because other people would spend tremendous effort later convincing you they had meant nothing. "Is there a problem here?" Kessler said, and the phrasing, the positioning of problem on Marcus rather than on the situation was also something Marcus filed away. "I'm not sure yet," Marcus said. "I'd like to speak to your shift manager." Kessler's posture shifted in a way that was barely visible but entirely legible. A slight squaring of the shoulders that in Marcus's experience meant one of two things. The person was about to stand down, or they were about to double down, and the particular quality of stillness in Kessler's jaw said it was the second one. "My shift manager is occupied," Kessler said. "I can take your information and have someone follow up." "I'd prefer to speak with them now," Marcus said. He was not loud. He had not raised his voice. He was aware that his voice was doing the thing it sometimes did in difficult meetings, going very quiet and very steady in a way that some people found more unsettling than volume would have been. And he was not doing it as a strategy, precisely because it was not something he turned on and off. It was simply what his voice did when he had decided to hold a position and wait. Nora had moved, so she was standing slightly behind him now, not hiding, but reorganizing her proximity, in the way children do when a situation has declared itself to be for adults. She was still holding on to his jacket pocket. He could feel the small, constant pressure of her fingers. "The enrichment program," Marcus said, "is on the 3rd floor of this building. My daughter has been attending it on Tuesdays and Thursdays for nearly 2 years. I have been picking her up in this lobby for nearly 2 years. The fact that you haven't seen me here before suggests you're new." Kessler said nothing. "That's not a criticism," Marcus said. "I'm giving you context. My daughter came down from 3 in that elevator." He indicated the bank behind Kessler. "Which means she was already inside the building, which means the program she attends has authorized access. The same authorization extends to the parents who come to collect their children." Kessler's jaw moved. "Sir, you still don't have a visitor badge." "Who issues the visitor badges?" "The front desk." "Then why?" Marcus said with the careful, unhurried quality of someone who has already understood what the answer will be. "Didn't you direct me to the front desk when I arrived, instead of stopping me here?" There was a pause. It was the kind of pause that fills itself with something unpleasant, a sound that exists only in its own absence. "I'm following protocol," Kessler said. "Whose protocol?" "Building security protocol." Marcus looked at him steadily. There was a question he had been carrying for the last 4 minutes, about whether what he was watching was inexperience, or whether it was something that had been taught to this particular young man by someone with authority over him, something passed down in the informal curriculum of a shift briefing, or a supervisory comment, or a pattern of praise and criticism that had nothing to do with any written policy. The answer, he suspected, was that it was both, and that the second one was the more serious problem. He did not ask the question yet. "I'd like the shift manager," he said again. Dina had come out from behind the front desk. Marcus noticed this in his peripheral vision without turning to look directly. Dina was a diplomatic and even-keeled person who had worked in this lobby through 4 different building management configurations and 2 major renovations. And she did not typically leave her desk during working hours, unless something had registered to her as requiring attention. The fact that she had left her desk registered to Marcus as data. She walked past Kessler to the front desk phone without making eye contact with anyone, lifted the receiver, and dialed an internal extension with the practiced efficiency of someone who has decided what to do and is doing it. Kessler did not look at her. A door beside the security station opened, and a man in his late 40s came out. His name badge said Briggs Shift Supervisor, and he had the slightly hurried look of someone who had received a phone call that he had hoped would turn out to be a minor thing. He looked at Kessler. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Nora, who looked back at him with the patient, evaluating expression of a child who is deciding whether an adult is trustworthy. "What's the situation?" Briggs said. "I stopped this gentleman for an access check," Kessler said. "He doesn't have a visitor badge and couldn't provide building-specific identification." Briggs looked at Marcus. There was something in Briggs's eyes that Marcus could not entirely read. Not hostility exactly, but a kind of preemptive positioning. The look of a man who has already decided that his best outcome is to confirm his employee and defuse the situation quickly. "Sir," Briggs said in the particular tone of voice that manages to sound reasonable while accomplishing nothing, "do you have your badge or a tenant authorization form? We can get this cleared up quickly." Marcus looked at Briggs for a moment. Then he looked back at Kessler. Then back at Briggs. "Before I answer that," he said, "I want to understand something. In the last 6 minutes, I've watched at least 4 people enter this lobby and pass through that gate without being stopped. One of them was in a suit, one was in a courier uniform, one was in work clothes carrying a cart. None of them were asked for identification. My daughter and I were stopped before we could approach the gate." He paused. "Is the protocol you're describing applied to everyone equally?" Briggs opened his mouth and then closed it again, which Marcus found more informative than whatever he had been about to say. "We're required to check anyone who appears to be," Briggs started, and then he used a construction that Marcus had heard before, "in different forms, in different rooms, by people who were trying to name something without naming it. Anyone who appears to be in the building without a clear purpose." "My purpose," Marcus said, "is to pick up my daughter. She is 8 years old, and she came out of that elevator 4 minutes ago. What additional clarity would a visitor badge provide?" Briggs looked at Kessler. Kessler's expression had gone into a particular kind of blankness that Marcus recognized as the expression of someone who is hoping that a superior will resolve a situation so that they don't have to recalculate their position. "I hear what you're saying, sir," Briggs said, and the word "sir" had begun to carry a weight in his mouth that it hadn't had at the start. The weight of a word being used to do work that sincerity was not available to do. "But my officer followed protocol, and until we can verify your access, I'm going to have to ask you to wait over here." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Nora said from slightly behind him, "Bah, we're going to be late for dinner." "I know," he said. "Are we in trouble?" He looked down at her, and the honesty that she deserved from him in this moment felt very specific and very important, because she was 8, and she was watching, and whatever she was learning right now from how he handled the next several minutes would outlast the situation by decades. "We're not in trouble," he said. "We're in a situation that someone has made unnecessarily complicated. There's a difference." She looked at him for another second. "Okay," she said in the voice she used when she was deciding to believe something provisionally. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket. Not his wallet this time. He found the lanyard with the matte black keycard and held it in his right hand without showing it. He looked at Briggs. He looked at Kessler. "I'd like," he said very calmly, "the full names and badge numbers of everyone involved in this conversation. My own as well, for completeness." Kessler's chin lifted by a fraction of an inch. "Why would we need your badge number?" "You wouldn't," Marcus said. "I'm going to need yours. And I'm going to need to know who issued your training materials." Briggs had gone still in a way that was different from his earlier stillness. "Is there a reason," Briggs said carefully, "that you need that information?" Marcus put the keycard back in his pocket. He had looked while reaching for it at the badge on the lanyard, which bore not only the standard building logo, but the designation Building Principal, a category of access that appeared on exactly 3 keycards in the history of 1200 Caldwell Avenue, and which the current building directory listed under the corporate entity that had owned and operated the building for 8 years. He had seen Briggs register the card and register what was written on it, and he had watched something rearrange itself very carefully behind Briggs's eyes. "I'm going to make a phone call," Marcus said. He took out his cell phone. "While I do that, you and your officer are welcome to stay where you are, or go back to your station. I don't have a preference." Briggs said, "Sir, if you can just clarify," and Marcus had already dialed. The call connected on the second ring. "Marcus?" The voice on the other end was his director of operations, a woman named Sandra Osei, who had been with Alden Property Technologies for 9 years, and who, when she said his name, always said it with the small addition of a slight upturn, as if it were both a greeting and a question about what needed solving. "Sandra," Marcus said, "I'm in the lobby. Can you come down?" There was a very brief silence. "How soon?" "When you can," he said. And then, because Sandra had worked with him long enough to calibrate the weight of what he said against the steadiness of how he said it, he added, "It's not urgent, but it should probably be soon." 2 minutes, she said, and the line went quiet. Kessler was watching him now with an expression that had shifted, not dramatically, but in the specific way that expressions shift when a person has begun to receive information that doesn't fit their original assessment, but hasn't yet fully processed it. He was looking at the phone. He was looking at the ease with which Marcus had made the call, and at the brevity of it, and at the 2 minutes. There was something turning over behind his eyes. Briggs had not moved. He had the careful, managed posture of a man standing in a place he is beginning to suspect he should not have taken up. Nora had come around to stand beside Marcus rather than behind him. She slipped her hand into his, and he held it, and neither of them said anything. Around them, the lobby continued in its amber late afternoon light. The planters stood along the south wall, green and impeccably maintained. The limestone floor held the weight of everything that was happening without any particular opinion about it. Somewhere above them, 429 people were doing the ordinary work of a Tuesday, unaware that in the lobby below, the building's owner was waiting for someone to come confirm what he had not yet said out loud. Marcus looked up very briefly at the name etched in steel letters above the elevator bank. He had chosen that font himself. He had stood in a design firm's studio on a Wednesday afternoon 11 years ago and looked at 12 different options and chosen that one because it was clean without being cold, precise without being harsh. He had told the designer it should look like something that intended to last. His daughter traced her thumb over his knuckle, a small, private gesture she had developed sometime in the last year that he had never asked her to explain. The elevator opened. Sandra Osei stepped out, already moving with the contained efficiency that characterized her in every building emergency Marcus had ever watched her navigate, which were not few. She was carrying nothing but her keycard and her phone, and her eyes found him the moment the elevator doors cleared. She crossed the lobby without hesitation, and then she stopped 3 feet away and looked at Kessler, and then at Briggs, and then back at Marcus. And then her gaze dropped for exactly 1 second to where Nora was holding his hand, and something passed through her expression that was not quite sadness and not quite anger, but occupied the precise intersection of both. She straightened. "Mr. Alden," she said, and her voice was clear and level and carrying in the lobby's excellent acoustics. "I am so sorry you were kept waiting." The quality of silence that followed Sandra's words was unlike the silence that had preceded them. The earlier silence had been the kind that presses inward, the kind generated by a confrontation in an enclosed space where no one is sure of the rules and everyone is performing some version of authority they're not entirely confident in. What followed, Sandra saying his name and his title in the lobby of 1200 Caldwell Avenue, was a different species entirely. It was the silence of recalibration, of a room full of people updating their understanding of what they had just witnessed. Kessler's face went through several things in rapid succession. Marcus watched it with the observational patience he brought to any situation where the facts were already clear to him, and the only remaining question was how other people were going to manage their arrival at them. There was the confusion first, the momentary incomprehension of a mind encountering a reality that contradicts its premise. Then something that was not quite recognition, but was the physical sensation of recognition preparing to happen. A tightening around the eyes, a very slight parting of the lips. Then, last and most legibly, the cold, retroactive review of every decision made in the last 8 minutes. Briggs had not moved. He was looking at Sandra with the expression of a man watching a procedural review begin, and understanding with considerable clarity that he is about to be on the receiving end of it. Dina had returned to her desk, but was not looking at her screen. Nora was looking at Sandra with the candid, uncomplicated evaluation of someone encountering a new person in an already interesting situation. "Thank you, Sandra," Marcus said. He said it at the same volume he had said everything else in this lobby in the last several minutes, which was moderate and even, and offered no theatrical announcement of anything. "This is Briggs, shift supervisor, and Kessler, security officer. I was stopped for an access check when I came to collect Nora from the program on 3. Sandra looked at Briggs. She looked at Kessler. She did not perform any emotion for the benefit of the room. The quality of her attention was the kind that does not need to perform itself, and people who had worked with her long enough recognized that this was when she was most precise. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "your officer stopped Mr. Alden without a visitor badge." Briggs said, "We're required to check," and then he heard himself and stopped. Sandra waited. She was exceptionally good at waiting. "Kessler was following protocol," Briggs said, and then amended it immediately with the small verbal adjustment of someone who realizes mid-sentence that they have chosen an inadequate foundation. "The protocol as he understood it." "I see," Sandra said. "And in your understanding, the protocol does not include recognizing building ownership keycards." There was a silence. "He didn't show a card," Kessler said. His voice was measured in the way of someone who is trying to remain in professional register while something underneath is becoming unsteady. "He showed a driver's license." "He showed me what I asked for," Marcus said. He said it without particular heat. It was an observation offered to the room. "I didn't offer additional documentation because I wasn't asked for it. I was told that a driver's license was insufficient and then asked to wait for a visitor badge, which I've never needed in 8 years of coming through this lobby." Kessler said, "I wasn't aware of that." "That's the relevant question," Marcus said. "What were you aware of, and who told you?" There was a quality to the question that made Briggs very still. Kessler looked at Briggs. It was a brief look, barely a second, and he pulled his gaze back quickly. But it was the kind of look that is also an answer. The look of someone checking to see what the person above them wants them to say. Marcus noted this. "I was briefed," Kessler said carefully, "that individuals without tenant IDs or visitor badges who were observed in the lobby during active hours should be approached for verification." "All individuals," Marcus said. A pause. "Individuals who," Kessler started and then stopped. "Who what?" Sandra said. Kessler's jaw tightened. He was not going to finish that sentence. Marcus understood why. The sentence had an ending, and the ending was not something Kessler wanted to say in this lobby, in front of Sandra and Dina, and the 3 other people who had gradually oriented themselves toward this conversation. The sentence's ending was the informal curriculum, the shift briefing, the accumulated shorthand that had taught this young man to recognize risk by a set of coordinates that included things a written policy would never say out loud. "I'd like to understand the full protocol," Marcus said, "and I'd like to see who authored it. Not the official security handbook, the working version, the one that was actually used in this morning's shift briefing." Briggs said, "Sir, I don't think that's..." Benton said calmly, "Sandra, can you request the security contractor's shift logs for the last 30 days? Along with incident reports for all lobby access interventions." "Already sending the request," Sandra said. She was typing on her phone. Briggs said nothing. The particular silence of a man standing at the top of a slope and beginning to understand its gradient. Marcus crouched down. He did it with the ease of someone who has crouched next to this child approximately 10,000 times. And he looked at Nora at her own level, and she looked back at him with her clear brown eyes that held things in them she wasn't ready to name yet, but that were accumulating in the careful way that children accumulate understanding about the world. "Can you do something for me?" he said. She nodded, a small, serious nod. "I need you to go stand with Dina for a few minutes, right over there. She'll give you the chair that spins." Nora looked at the front desk. She looked back at him. "Is the chair that spins the good chair?" "It's the best chair in the lobby," Marcus said. She considered this. She released his hand. She walked with the self-possessed carriage of someone performing trust as an act of deliberate choice across the limestone floor to Dina's desk, where Dina had already pushed the chair out and was smiling at her with the warmth of a woman who has been in this building long enough to know what she has just watched happen and feels it in the appropriate place in her chest. Marcus stood back up. He looked at Kessler. He had not decided before this moment exactly how he was going to handle the next portion of the conversation. He had been managing the situation as it moved the way he managed most things, not from a fixed script, but from a fixed set of principles applied to whatever the situation actually presented. But looking at Kessler now, at this young man who was perhaps 24 or 25, who was standing in the aftermath of a mistake and trying to find a position that wasn't entirely indefensible, Marcus felt something that was not sympathy exactly, but was in its general neighborhood. Kessler was not the problem. Kessler was a symptom of the problem. The problem had a name, and the name was somewhere in the shift logs. "Ryan," Marcus said, because Kessler's first name was on his badge, and Marcus had read it when Kessler had first stepped forward, and because using a person's first name is a deliberate choice about what kind of conversation you're deciding to have. "I want you to understand something. This is not primarily about what happened tonight." Kessler looked at him. "It's about what you were taught," Marcus said, "and who taught it to you, and whether anyone in the chain above you ever asked themselves whether what they were teaching made any sense when written down plainly." He paused. "Do you know what's written in your official training materials about how to select individuals for access verification?" Kessler said very slowly. "Suspicious behavior or lack of proper credentials." "Right," Marcus said. "And in tonight's interaction, which of those two criteria did you apply?" Another pause, longer this time. "Kessler." Briggs said a single word, carrying the full weight of an instruction. Marcus turned to look at Briggs. "I'm going to ask you not to coach his answer," he said, and the quality in his voice was the very still water quality, the kind that holds everything below the surface in suspension. And Briggs went quiet. Marcus waited. "I applied," Kessler said, and the word came out effortfully, the way words come out when a person is dismantling their own position, one piece at a time. "Judgment." "Yes," Marcus said. "You did. And that judgment was based on what you were taught to see as risk. That's what I want to understand. Because if you were taught to see it the way I think you were taught to see it, that's not a personal failure. That's a policy failure. And policy failures are fixed with policy, not with one conversation in a lobby." Kessler looked at him for a moment, and there was something shifting behind his eyes that was more complex than Marcus had expected. Not defensiveness now, but something that might have been in a different moment and context. Recognition. It did not last long. Kessler straightened. His professional register reasserted itself, the protective layer of procedure. "I was doing my job," he said, and the sentence was smaller than the conversation it was trying to end. "I know," Marcus said. "That's the problem." He turned to Sandra. She had not stopped typing. "Get me everything from the last 6 months," he said. "Incident reports, access logs, shift briefings. And get me the contract with the security firm. I want to see the service level agreement and the training certification." "It'll be in your inbox before you get home," she said. Marcus looked around the lobby, at Briggs, who was in the process of deciding whether to speak and determining correctly that there was nothing useful left to say. At the door through which the man in the gray suit had passed without incident 20 minutes ago. At Dina's desk, where Nora had found the spinning chair and was turning in small, careful rotations, watching Marcus with the patience of someone who will wait as long as necessary for the world to resolve itself. He walked to the front desk. "Hey," Nora said, with the careful dignity of someone trying not to look like they've been waiting. "Hey," he said. "Ready?" "I made a drawing," she said, and held up the rolled paper, which turned out to be a landscape of what might have been mountains, or might have been clouds, rendered in the ambitious mixed media style of an 8-year-old, with access to both watercolors and a ballpoint pen. "Mountains or clouds?" he said. "Both," she said. "You can have mountains inside clouds." He looked at it. "Yeah," he said. "You can." He was straightening up when Kessler's radio crackled. Marcus heard the word from the other side of the lobby, indistinct but audible, the shape of a question rather than a statement. Kessler raised the radio, said something back in a low voice, and then looked across the lobby at Briggs, with an expression that had abandoned its professional composure and replaced it with something Marcus read as the early stages of panic. Briggs walked to him. They spoke for 4 seconds. Briggs looked up, found Marcus's eyes across the lobby, and said in a voice that had gone several registers more careful than it had been at any previous point in this conversation, "Mr. Alden, I need to ask you to wait just a moment." He had been going to say something else. Marcus was certain of it. Something that would have been an escalation, because Kessler's radio had crackled, and that had changed something in both of them. But Sandra was already at Marcus's side. "What's happened?" she said. Briggs said, "We have a second officer coming down." Marcus said, "Why?" And Briggs said, with the expression of a man who is watching events proceed past any point where he can still shape them, "Protocol for unresolved access disputes." Marcus looked at him. He looked at Kessler, who would not meet his eyes. He looked at the elevator indicator, which showed a car descending. He put his hand lightly on Nora's shoulder. "Stay close," he said. The elevator opened. The second officer was built heavier than Kessler, with the wide-set stance of someone who had been trained for physical de-escalation, and had perhaps too readily confused the capacity for it with the necessity of it. He came out of the elevator already in motion, eyes moving to Kessler, first for the situational read, then to Briggs, then finally settling on Marcus, with the assessing flatness of someone who had received a specific kind of briefing on the way down. His hand was near his belt, not on it, near it. Nora's fingers had closed around Marcus's wrist, not his hand this time, but his wrist, with a small ferocity that was entirely distinct from the way she normally held on to him. Marcus heard her breath catch. He did not move. He stood where he was on the limestone floor of the lobby that he owned and had designed and had filled with pale plants and good light because he had wanted people to feel that the building intended them well. He stood in his olive canvas jacket with the mountain patch on the backpack that was slightly too small for a grown man, and he held very still in the manner of someone who understands that stillness at certain moments is not passivity, but precision. That the costs of a wrong movement right now could not be calculated quickly enough to risk making one. The second officer moved to stand slightly to Kessler's right, which put both of them between Marcus and the main exit. This detail arrived in Marcus's awareness with the specific clarity of things that the body registers before the mind fully processes them. 2 uniformed men, a blocked line of movement, his daughter's hand on his wrist. He thought with great deliberateness about his father. His father had been a postal worker for 31 years and had never once in Marcus's memory raised his voice in a situation that was trying to provoke him. Not because he lacked the capacity or the cause, but because he had understood something very early that Marcus had taken longer to learn. That the anger a person shows in a moment like this almost always becomes the story told about the moment. And the story told about the moment is what people remember, when the truth is harder to hold on to. Do not hand them the story his father had said. Make them account for their own. Marcus was very calm. He was calm the way a person is calm when they have committed to a course of action and are simply executing it without turbulence, without the friction of second-guessing. He looked at the second officer and said, "Your name and badge number, please." The second officer blinked. It was a small blink, the kind that follows an unexpected reframing of a situation. He had come down expecting to find an agitated man. He had found a man who was asking for his credentials. "Officer Perkins," he said after a moment. 414. "Thank you," Marcus said. He said it without irony and without warmth, the way you say thank you when you mean thank you and nothing else. He took out his phone and typed both names into a note. Briggs, Kessler, Perkins. The time, the date, the specific phrasing of the things that had been said. "Sir," Perkins said, and his voice had recalibrated somewhat from its initial register. "We're going to need you to come with us to the security office." "Why?" Sandra said. She was beside Marcus, and her voice carried the specific kind of authority that belongs to people who have sat in enough rooms where decisions are made to know exactly how a question should land when you want it to land with weight. Perkins looked at her. He had not expected her. "There's an unresolved access dispute," he said. "The dispute," Sandra said, "is fully resolved. This is Mr. Marcus Alden. He is the founder and CEO of Alden Property Technologies, which is the parent company of Caldwell Tower Holdings, which owns and operates this building. There is no access dispute." A silence fell that was different from all the silences that had preceded it in the last 34 minutes. Perkins looked at Kessler. Kessler looked at Briggs. Briggs had the expression of a man who has just watched a door close on the last room that might have contained a favorable outcome. The second officer's hand moved away from his belt. It was a small movement, the smallest movement. Marcus noted it and kept his own position, but Kessler stepped forward. This was the thing Marcus had not anticipated, and he registered it with something that was not quite surprise, because surprise was too unfocused an emotion for what he was feeling, but was closer to a kind of weary recognition. Kessler stepped forward, and his chin was up, and his eyes had gone into the particular configuration that Marcus associated with people who have decided that the best defense is an offense, and that capitulating now means acknowledging everything that preceded it. "We still need to verify independently," Kessler said. "Anyone can claim a title." Sandra said, "Ryan," and the use of his first name was precise and deliberate. "I am the director of operations for this building. I have worked for Mr. Alden for 9 years. I am verifying independently right now." "Protocol requires," Kessler started. "The protocol," Sandra said, "does not supersede the ownership structure of the building. If you're uncertain about the ownership structure, I can show you the property registry." Kessler's jaw was tight. He was trapped by his own logic, standing in it the way a person stands in a room they've locked from the inside. And Marcus watched him try to find a door. "Nora," Marcus said quietly, "go stand by the planter." She did not argue. She let go of his wrist and went to stand by the south planter, hugging her rolled drawing against her chest, watching everything with the clear, enormous attention of someone who is understanding something important and knows that understanding it is going to take a long time, and that this moment is only the beginning of that time. Kessler said, "I'm going to need you to come to the security office." Marcus looked at him. He looked at him for the length of time it takes to be absolutely certain that a decision is right before you make it. And then he said, "I'm not going to the security office, Ryan. You are." Kessler reached for his radio, and the elevator doors behind him opened. Not because Sandra had called anyone. Not because Marcus had pressed a button or sent a message in the last 30 seconds. The elevator opened because a woman had pressed the button on the 11th floor and ridden it down, a woman who had come down because she had been standing in the corridor outside her own office when Sandra had walked rapidly toward the elevator 3 minutes ago, and had thought, with the specific attenuation of someone who has spent 9 years learning to read the building's rhythms, that something worth knowing about was happening in the lobby. Her name was Patricia Osei, no relation to Sandra, who had arrived at the company 4 years before Sandra and held the title of Chief Administrative Officer. And she was 61 years old and had the bearing of someone who had been in important rooms for long enough that she had stopped needing to adjust her posture for them. She stepped out of the elevator. She looked at the tableau assembled in the lobby of the building she had worked in for 13 years. She looked at Kessler. She looked at the radio in his hand. She looked at Marcus and at Nora standing by the planter with her drawing. And she said nothing for a moment that stretched beyond its own ordinary length. Then she said, "Marcus, is Nora all right?" The lobby was absolutely still. Kessler's hand on the radio had not moved. Perkins had not moved. Briggs had not moved. Marcus said, "She's fine." Patricia turned and looked at Kessler with the focused clarity of someone who has decided on the exact nature of a situation and does not require any additional information. She said, "I need your full name badge number and the name of your supervisor at the contracting firm." Kessler said, "Ma'am, I'm in the middle of a..." And she said with a precision that required no volume to accomplish its effect, "You are not in the middle of anything. You are at the end of something. There is a difference, and I would advise you to understand it immediately." Perkins took a half step back. Kessler looked at Briggs. Briggs was looking at the floor. The expression on Briggs's face had traveled a long distance in the last 4 minutes, from the confident procedural positioning of his arrival, to something that lived closer to the understanding that the record of this evening existed in this building's cameras, in Sandra's email thread, in the memory of everyone standing in this lobby, and that none of those things were going to change, regardless of what he said next. Marcus walked to the planter. He crouched down next to Nora. She was holding her drawing very carefully, the mountains inside clouds landscape, and she was looking at him with a question in her eyes that was not about what had just happened, because she had understood what had just happened, but about something earlier, about the 8 minutes before Sandra had come out of the elevator, about what he had been doing in those 8 minutes when she was not standing beside him. "Bah," she said quietly enough that only he could hear it. "Did they know? Before Sandra came?" He looked at her. "No," he said. "Did you know?" He thought about the most honest answer. "I knew enough," he said. She turned this over. "Why didn't you just tell them?" She said it without accusation, as a genuine question, the kind she asked when she was trying to understand the logic of the world rather than judge it. He sat down on the floor of the lobby against the planter, which was not what a CEO was supposed to do in his own building lobby, with 2 security officers and 3 of his senior staff watching. And he thought about how to say this to an 8-year-old in a way that was true enough to be useful for the next 30 years of her life. "Because," he said, "I wanted to understand what was happening before I stopped it. If I'd said who I was in the first minute, they would have apologized and moved on, and nothing would have changed. The thing that was wrong here wasn't the 2 of them. It was what they were taught. And to fix what they were taught, I needed to see it clearly first." Nora was quiet. "Also," he said, "I wanted to show you something." "What?" she said. "That you don't have to prove yourself in the first minute," he said. "You're allowed to let people show you who they are first." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Kessler, who was standing at the gate with his radio and his stiff-shouldered posture and his very young face. And she looked back at Marcus. "He made a bad choice," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. "Is he going to lose his job?" Marcus thought about his father. He thought about what it meant to make a decision that ends someone's employment, and whether that decision could be made without satisfaction in it, whether the correction could exist separately from the gratification of having caused it. He thought it could. He thought it had to. "That's not my decision," he said, which was true in the specific sense that the contracting company would make the employment decision, though Marcus's decision about the contract would shape everything downstream of it. "That's between him and the people who hired him," Nora nodded slowly. "And the person who taught him the wrong thing." He looked at her. "Different conversation," he said. From across the lobby, Patricia said, "Marcus, we need you for a moment." He stood. He offered Nora his hand. She took it, still holding her drawing, and they walked back across the limestone floor together, under the steel letters in the font that was meant to last, toward the small group of people assembled in the amber late afternoon light of a Tuesday in October. And Marcus watched Kessler's face as they crossed the distance, watched the young man try to find something in his own expression that was still defensible, and watched him fail to find it. Sandra held up her phone. On the screen was the building registry pulled from the county property database, with the address 1200 Caldwell Avenue, and the owner listed as Caldwell Tower Holdings, LLC, and the principal officer listed as Marcus D. Alden. She turned the phone so Kessler could see it. Kessler looked at the screen. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the name on the screen. He looked at Marcus again, and the expression that crossed his face was not the one Marcus had expected and was not entirely comfortable to witness, because it was not defiance, and it was not the simple collapse of a position, but was something closer to the specific, private horror of a person understanding all at once the full dimensions of what they have done. Not the policy violation, not the professional consequence, but the act itself, stripped of its procedural framing, standing in the lobby of a building owned by the man it had been done to, in front of that man's 8-year-old daughter. Marcus did not look away. He did not fill the silence. He let Kessler stand in it for as long as Kessler needed to stand in it. The security office was a room Marcus had been in exactly 3 times before tonight. It was on the ground floor, behind the gate station, with a wall of monitors showing feeds from every camera in the building, and a desk that held more paperwork than the room's size seemed able to justify. It smelled like coffee that had been warming for too long. There were 2 chairs on the visitor side of the desk, and one on the other side, and that asymmetry had always struck Marcus as the room's most honest quality, the unambiguous declaration of what kind of conversations it was designed to have. He was not in the room. He was standing outside it in the short corridor between the lobby and the security office door, with Sandra on one side and Patricia on the other, because Nora was sitting in Patricia's office on the 11th floor with Patricia's assistant, who had been apprised of the situation and had responded with the efficiency of someone who understood that the assignment was to keep an 8-year-old comfortable and occupied while the adults handled something downstairs. Nora had gone up with the kind of cooperative trust that made Marcus simultaneously proud and aware of how much he owed her for it. Inside the security office, Briggs was on the phone with the regional director of the contracting firm, a company called Meridian Security Solutions that held the building's external security contract. Marcus knew this because Sandra had dialed the number herself from memory and had handed the phone to Briggs with the expression of someone presenting a bill. Kessler was in there too, and Marcus could hear the conversation through the door, because the door was not fully closed and the room's acoustics were, by the nature of small rooms with hard surfaces, unkind to the illusion of privacy. He heard Briggs saying, in the careful, measured voice of a man trying to manage information and losing control of it incrementally, "There was a situation in the lobby this evening involving an access verification. The individual has been identified as the building owner." He heard the voice on the other end of the phone, tinny through the speaker, say something Marcus could not fully make out. He heard Briggs say, "The officer followed what he understood to be protocol." Another voice on the other end. He heard Briggs say, in a voice that had lost another layer of its managed quality, "The protocol is communicated in shift briefings, Yes? No, it's not in the written handbook. Marcus looked at Sandra. She looked at him. There it is, she said quietly. He nodded. The door opened. The regional director of Meridian Security Solutions had apparently determined that a phone call was insufficient and had requested to speak to someone from building management directly. And Briggs, holding the phone, with the posture of a man grateful for any transfer of responsibility, offered it to Sandra. She took it and stepped away down the corridor, speaking in the low, precise tones she used when she was establishing a framework for a conversation that was going to have consequences. Marcus stepped into the security office. Kessler was sitting in one of the two visitor chairs. He was not sitting the way he had been standing in the lobby, with the squared shoulders and the practiced posture of a person performing their role. He was sitting the way a person sits when the performance has ended and what's underneath it is more uncertain. His hands were in his lap. He was looking at the floor. Briggs, without the phone, was standing to the left of the desk, with an expression that had moved well past anything useful and was now simply the face of a man enduring. Marcus sat down in the chair next to Kessler, not across from him, next to him. Kessler looked up. I want to ask you something directly, Marcus said, and I want you to answer me directly, not in terms of protocol, not in terms of what you were told, just you and what you actually think. Kessler said nothing, which Marcus took as permission. When I walked through that lobby tonight, Marcus said, before you stopped me, what did you think you were seeing? Kessler was quiet for long enough that Marcus thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said carefully, someone who didn't fit. Didn't fit what? Another pause. Kessler's jaw worked slightly. The profile, he said, and then, with the uncomfortable effort of a person being honest about something they would have preferred not to be honest about, of someone who should be in the building. And that profile, Marcus said, where did it come from? Kessler looked at Briggs. Marcus did not look at Briggs. He kept his eyes on Kessler. Kessler looked back at Marcus. Training, he said. Informal. During shift briefings. Who ran the shift briefings? Kessler's eyes moved to Briggs again. This time Marcus did look because there was no longer any purpose in not looking. Briggs said, I'm not going to. And Marcus said, you don't have to say anything right now. The shift logs will tell us. Sandra is already requesting them. Briggs's mouth closed. Marcus turned back to Kessler. Ryan, he said, you made a serious error tonight. Not because you followed protocol, because the framework you were given to understand risk was built on something that doesn't hold up when you write it down plainly. You were taught to see threat in an image rather than in a behavior. Do you understand what I mean? Kessler looked at him. His expression had a quality Marcus had not seen in it before tonight, something that lived just below defensiveness, something younger and more uncertain and more honest. Yes, he said. You're 24, 25, Marcus said. 23, Kessler said. You've been in this job how long? 6 weeks. Marcus absorbed this. 6 weeks was enough time to be trained, and not enough time to question the training. 6 weeks was the window in which the things you are taught become the things you assume, before you've accumulated enough experience to interrogate the assumptions. 6 weeks isn't long enough to know what you don't know yet, Marcus said. I want to be clear with you about that. The decision about your employment tonight is not mine. It's the contracting firm's, and it's Briggs's. I'm not here to tell you what that decision will be. He paused. But I want you to understand something, regardless of what it is. The fact that you were taught something wrong does not eliminate your responsibility for acting on it. It means the responsibility is distributed. It does not mean yours goes away. Kessler was very still. Do you understand that? Marcus said. Yes, Kessler said. The word came out with the specific weight of a word that is being said by someone who means it, not performing meaning, but generating it from somewhere real. Good, Marcus said. He stood up. He looked at Briggs. I want every shift briefing recorded from now on, every one. And I want an independent audit of the gap between the written training materials and what's actually being communicated in those briefings. Sandra will coordinate that with the new firm. Briggs looked up. New firm, he said. Marcus looked at him for a moment. 6 weeks of briefings produced this outcome, he said. That's a structural problem, not a staffing problem. The contract will be reviewed. That review is going to have a specific conclusion. He walked to the door. He stopped. He turned back because there was one more thing, and it mattered to him that it be said directly in this room and not in a meeting or a memo or anywhere that required it to be translated through someone else. Briggs, he said. Briggs looked at him. You heard what I said to Ryan about responsibility being distributed? Marcus said. I want you to understand that I meant that to include you. Briggs said nothing. There was nothing left for him to say. Marcus walked out of the security office and back through the corridor and out into the lobby. And the lobby received him the way it always did, with its good light and its stone floor and its impeccable planters, indifferent to what had happened in the last hour, in the way that spaces are indifferent, which is to say, entirely without judgment, but also without any comfort to offer. He found the one thing in the lobby that was not indifferent. The young man at the second elevator bank, the one whose name Marcus had not gotten tonight because he had arrived after the main confrontation. He was one of Meridian's officers in his early 30s, and Marcus had noticed him during the last 20 minutes of the lobby situation because he had been the only uniformed person in the space who had not at any point moved toward Marcus. He had stayed at his post by the elevator bank and had looked at the floor of the lobby. Not in shame, exactly. In the specific quality of attention that belongs to someone who disagrees with what is happening around them and has not yet found the moment or the standing to say so. He was still there. Marcus walked over to him. I didn't get your name, Marcus said. The young man looked up. His name badge said Carter Dominic. His eyes had something in them that Marcus recognized, the look of someone who has been waiting to be seen. Dominic, Marcus said. Did you know who I was before Patricia came down? A pause. Then, no, sir, but I knew something was wrong before that. Marcus looked at him. What did you do about it? Carter's jaw tightened slightly. I called the main desk. I told Dina I thought she should contact building management. That was about 4 minutes before your call to Miss Osei. Marcus absorbed this. 4 minutes. Carter had seen what Kessler had not seen, or had seen what Kessler had seen and understood it differently, and had done the thing available to him within his authority. Who's your direct supervisor at Meridian? Marcus said. Carter told him. Marcus took out his phone and typed the name. Then he looked at Carter and said, You're going to hear from Sandra tomorrow. I'd appreciate it if you kept that to yourself for now. Carter nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Marcus walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for 11. The elevator came. He stood in it as it rose through the 12 stories of the building he had built from a single leased floor, past the floors that held the company's engineers and its finance team and its legal department, and the project managers who kept 6 simultaneous developments in motion across 4 cities. He stood in it without thinking about any of those things. He stood in it thinking about an 8-year-old girl who had come down a different elevator 2 hours ago, carrying a painting of mountains inside clouds, and who had held onto his wrist with a ferocity she had never had occasion to use before tonight, and who had asked him in the quietest part of the lobby's amber light why he hadn't just told them. Patricia's assistant met him at the elevator doors on 11. Her name was Grace, and she was 29 and efficient and very kind, and she said, She's in the small conference room. She found the good markers. Marcus found Nora at the head of the long conference table with a sheet of butcher paper from the supply cabinet and approximately 12 markers arranged around her in a semicircle by color, which was her standard organizational method for any creative undertaking. She was working on what appeared to be a continuation of the clouds and mountains landscape from earlier, expanded to include a city that was either very small or very far away. She looked up when he came in. She looked at his face with the complete practiced attention of someone who has been reading a specific face for 8 years and has become very good at it. "Okay," she said. "Yeah," he said. She looked at him for another second. She was not entirely satisfied with the answer, which was the correct response to the answer because the answer was simplified, and she was old enough to know simplified from true, even if she was not old enough yet to know exactly what was missing from it. "The guard," she said. "What happened?" Marcus sat down in the chair beside her, not at the head of the table, but beside her, at her level. "He's going to lose his job tonight," Marcus said. Nora turned her marker over in her hands. It was the dark blue one, the one she used for sky. "Because of what he did to us." Because of what he did, and because of what he was taught, and because those two things together made a situation that can't be excused on either end, Marcus said. He paused. "It's not a happy thing. He's 23 years old." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Did you feel bad for him?" Marcus thought about sitting in the chair next to Kessler in the security office. He thought about the specific quality of that young man's honesty in the last moments of the conversation. The yes that had come from somewhere real. He thought about the 6 weeks and what a person becomes in 6 weeks if no one challenges what they're being shaped into. "A little," he said. "I think there's more than one person responsible for tonight." Nora nodded. She uncapped the dark blue marker. She said without looking up from the paper, "Was it about what we look like that he stopped us?" Marcus looked at her. She was still not looking at him. She was making a very deliberate mark on the paper, a long, curved stroke of dark blue that might have been sky or might have been water. "Yes," he said, "partly. And it was about what I was wearing, and about him not recognizing me, and about the way his supervisor had taught him to decide who belonged in a space and who didn't. All of those things were part of it." "But the looking like us part," Nora said, "that was in there." "Yes," Marcus said, "it was in there." She made another stroke with the marker. The sky or water was expanding. She said, "Is it going to happen again? To us? Somewhere else?" He sat with the question because it deserved to be sat with and not immediately answered. "Probably," he said. "In different places, in different forms. I can't promise you it won't." She looked up at him now. Her eyes were very clear and very direct, and there was something in them that was not entirely childhood anymore, which was a specific kind of grief to witness in your own child. The small, irretrievable departure from a world where things are simpler. "What do we do?" she said. He thought about his father's voice. He thought about, "Do not hand them the story." He thought about the 8 minutes in the lobby when he had stood in the amber light and held his position and waited, not because he was powerless, but because he had understood something about the moment, that the moment was not yet ready to show everyone else. "We do what we did tonight," he said. "We stay steady. We pay attention. We remember the names and the details, and we don't let people revise what happened after the fact. And we change what we can change in whatever way is available to us." Nora looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You own the building." He said, "Yes." "So you could change a lot." "Some things," he said. "The things inside the building. The ones outside it are harder." She considered this. She put the cap back on the dark blue marker and picked up the pale green one. She said, "Okay," in the voice she used when she had accepted something and filed it and was moving forward. which was the voice Marcus thought of someone who was going to be all right. Not untouched and not unchanged, but all right. Okay, he said. She turned back to the paper. Do you want to draw? She said. There's a whole empty part down here. He looked at the space she was indicating, a wide, unfinished quadrant at the bottom of the paper, where the city was still incomplete and the ground hadn't been colored in yet. What color is the ground? He said. She handed him the brown marker and the orange one. Both, she said. You can mix them. He uncapped the brown marker. He had signed acquisition papers for this building on a Thursday afternoon alone in a conference room 8 years ago, while his mother was at church. He had leased the first floor 18 years before that with a pitch deck that had more conviction than revenue. He had made hundreds of decisions in between those two moments, decisions about design and hiring and investment and partnership and risk, and he had made most of them with clarity, and a few of them with great difficulty, and all of them with the understanding that what he was building was not only a company. He made a mark on the paper with the brown marker, a line that became the beginning of ground. Nora, beside him, continued the sky. 3 weeks later, the contract with Meridian Security Solutions was formally terminated. The building's new security provider was selected through a competitive process that Sandra ran with the specificity of someone who had developed strong opinions about what the process should include, which was a detailed review of training methodology and a requirement that all shift briefings be documented and available for management review. The new firm's regional trainer came to 1200 Caldwell Avenue on the first Monday of November and spent 4 hours with the incoming team on recognition criteria, implicit bias awareness, and the legal and ethical frameworks around access verification. It was not a short session, and it was not comfortable for everyone in the room, and it was also not optional. Briggs resigned 2 days before the contract termination. Marcus did not comment on the timing. Kessler was let go by Meridian on the evening of the incident. As a result of the security footage, the witness accounts from 4 lobby personnel, and the gap between written protocol and actual shift briefing content that the audit had confirmed within 48 hours. Marcus did not feel satisfaction about this. He had said what he wanted to say to Kessler in the security office, and the employment decision had been the contracting firm's. And the story he kept in his own mind about that evening was not the story of something that had been won. It was the story of something that had been identified and addressed and changed. And those were related to winning, but they were not the same thing. Dominic Carter was offered a position with the incoming security firm at a senior officer grade. Sandra had spoken to the incoming provider about him directly. Carter accepted and was assigned to the main lobby on Tuesdays and Thursdays, a scheduling detail that Marcus had not requested and had not discouraged. The community enrichment nonprofit renewed its partnership with the building for another 3 years in December. The program coordinator sent a note to building management that mentioned with some warmth that the building had always felt like one of the safest spaces the program operated in, and that she was glad to hear the building's leadership shared that commitment. Sandra forwarded the note to Marcus without comment. He read it twice and then put it in the folder on his desk, where he kept things that mattered in ways that were hard to articulate quickly. On the first Tuesday of December, Marcus came down to the lobby at 4:49, which was 3 minutes earlier than usual. He found his spot by the south planter. He pulled out his phone. He answered 2 emails from the folder he saved for exactly this window of the week. The elevator opened at 5:11. Nora came out carrying something she had made, which turned out to be a small clay bird that listed slightly to the left and had been painted in a color she described as basically gold, but actually more orange. "For the building," she said. "For the front desk. Because Dina is nice." He looked at the bird. The glaze had been applied with great enthusiasm, if not perfect evenness. The wing on the left side was larger than the wing on the right side. The eye was a small, deliberate dot of dark blue. "She'll love it," he said. "I know. Nora said, with the complete confidence of someone who has made a gift with specific intent and is certain of its landing. They crossed the lobby together, past the turnstile where Dominic Carter stood, and nodded at Marcus and said, "Good evening, Mr. Alden," and past the planters and the good limestone, and the amber light coming through the glass at the low, late afternoon angle that Marcus had approved, and that had continued being beautiful on every Tuesday since, regardless of what had happened beneath it. Dina received the clay bird with the expression of someone being given something they did not know they needed until they were holding it. She turned it over in her hands, looked at the dark blue eye, set it on the corner of the front desk with a slight leftward tilt that was not a flaw, but a personality, and said, "This is the best thing that has happened to this desk." Nora took this in without false modesty. "I know," she said. Marcus watched his daughter lean on the front desk and begin telling Dina about the firing process of the kiln, which she had researched extensively and had opinions about. And he thought about the drawing that was still on the conference room table on the 11th floor. The mountains inside Cloud's landscape, with the unfinished city and the ground he had colored in on a Tuesday evening with borrowed markers while the buildings settled around them. He thought about the things he could change and the things outside the building that were harder, and about the distance between those two categories, and the work that lived in that distance, and how long it would take, and how much of it he would have to do, without knowing whether it was enough. He thought his father would have had something to say about that. He thought his father would have said, "It's not about enough. It's about not stopping." The bird sat on the corner of the desk, with its blue eye looking out at the lobby, slightly tilted, entirely itself. It was not a bad thing to have in the room where people entered,